Welcome back to Mental Mike's Recovery Radio, where recovery meets discovery. I am Mental Mike, and this is episode 23. Before we go anywhere today, I just want to say this. The fact that you keep showing up week after week, doing this work, that takes a kind of strength that most people never fully recognize in themselves. This week, I want to offer you a different way of seeing yourself, not as a single person trying to hold it all together, but as a whole community of parts, each one shaped by experience, each one trying in its own way to protect you. That feeling of being at war with yourself, one part ready for healing and another part reaching for the escape hatch, that is not a character flaw. That is a fragmented system doing the best it can with what it learned. And the goal of this week's work in the Unified Flux Model is not to silence those parts or cut them away. It is to bring them back to the table. We use two powerful frameworks this week to build that understanding. Jung's map of the inner world, the shadow, the persona, the self, gives us the who, the cast of characters that have been living inside you all along. And transactional analysis gives us the how, the way these parts actually talk to each other, the way the critical parent attacks, the wounded child reacts, and the adult self, the one we are working to strengthen, gets overwhelmed and starts to rationalize. Learning to hear those voices, to name them, to understand what each one needs, that is how the UFM describes the architecture of wholeness. Not a perfect, polished self, but a wise, compassionate leader who can hold the whole community with steadiness and care. You are not broken, you never were, you are fragmented. And those are two very different things. And today I want to introduce you to Trevor. Trevor's story speaks directly to the heart of what this week is asking you to face. Because Trevor knows what it means to feel like the different parts of himself were never on speaking terms. The person he showed the world, and the person living in the silence underneath. His journey toward becoming the calm, conscious leader of his own internal community, toward brokering that peace between the parts that had been at war for years, maps directly onto the work I've built into week 23 of the UFM. Trevor stopped fighting his parts and started leading them, and his story just might show you how to do the same. So settle in. Be gentle with every part of yourself today. And let's go deeper together.
Hey, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge the guts it takes to show up for yourself like this. Seriously, I hope you're seeing just how strong you are. Today, we're kicking off a really fascinating discussion, one that might just change the entire way you see yourself. It's this idea that you're not one single person. Nope. You're actually a whole community of different parts living inside you. Let's get into it. This quote right here, it's everything for this week. See, the point of all this work isn't to chop off or get rid of the parts of you that you don't like. It's about bringing all of your parts to the table, understanding what they need, and learning how to lead them as a team. This is a journey of integration, not elimination. You know that feeling like you're literally at war with yourself? If you've ever felt that, you are so not alone. In fact, that feeling is a totally normal consequence of addiction. This week, we're going to start to understand that internal battle, not as some deep character flaw, but as a system of parts that have just gotten fragmented. And the good news is, we can absolutely learn to bring them back into harmony.
This really breaks it down, doesn't it? On one side, you've got that part of you that is so ready for recovery, that wants to be healthy, that wants connection. And on the other side, you've got this other part, the one that learned a long time ago that the way to deal with pain is to find an escape hatch. Addiction just loves to live in that gap between the two, you know? It feels that conflict. Our job is to step in and mediate a peace treaty.
So, to get a handle on this inner community, we're going to borrow a map from a brilliant guy named Carl Jung. Now, don't worry, this isn't going to be some heavy academic theory. Think of it more like a practical guide, a who's who for identifying all the different characters and voices that make you, you. So first up in our cast of characters is the shadow. And it's not as scary as it sounds, I promise. These are just all the parts of yourself that you were taught somewhere along the way to hide or reject. And it's not just bad things like anger or jealousy. It can also be really positive stuff like your wild creativity or your power to stand up for yourself. As Mental Mike points out, addiction doesn't create the shadow, but man does it give it a chaotic and often destructive way to finally get a word in.
And then there's the persona. This is your social mask, right? It's the version of you that you show to the world, at work, with your family, with certain friends. The UAFOM teaches us that active addiction can just shatter this persona into a million pieces. You probably had a functional persona who paid the bills and showed up, and then you had the secret addict persona. The real problem was those two parts weren't on speaking terms, and that creates this massive, exhausting division inside you.
Okay, so Jung gave us the who, the cast of characters. Now we're going to grab another really powerful map called Transactional Analysis. And this one helps us understand how these different parts actually talk to each other. This is where we get super practical about changing that internal chatter.
So, transactional analysis, or TA, basically says we all have three main ego states running the show inside. First, there's the parent. This is like a recording of all the rules and messages we got from our parents and other authority figures. Then you've got the adult. That's our rational, logical, here and now self. And finally, there's the child, which is where all of our feelings, memories, and early experiences live.
And this right here, this is exactly how the whole system gets hijacked by addiction. It's a really vicious cycle. It starts when your internal critical parent starts attacking you with shame. You're so stupid, you messed up again. That attack triggers all the pain, fear, and loneliness in your inner child part. And then the adult, the one who's supposed to be thinking clearly, gets totally overwhelmed and compromised. It starts to rationalize using, saying, well, this is the only way to get some relief from this pain. Recognizing that cycle is the very first step to breaking free. And you can actually start to hear these voices in your own head. It's pretty cool once you start listening. That parent voice often uses words like should, must, always. The adult is the one asking questions, thinking logically. Okay, what are my options? And the child speaks the language of pure feeling. I feel sad. I want that. I'm so scared. Just paying attention to the words you use internally can tell you who's driving the bus in that moment. So, we have these two amazing maps, one from Jung and one from Transactional Analysis. Now, let's bring it all together and connect it back to the core framework of our entire journey here, the Unified Flux Model. This is where it all clicks. Okay, this is probably the most crucial takeaway from our whole discussion. The Unified Flux Model doesn't see these parts as problems you need to get rid of. It sees them as patterns of energy. Your critical parent, your wounded child, they're all just parts of your energy system. The goal of recovery isn't to shut them up or lock them away. It's to remove the blockages that addiction built up so that they can finally start to work together in a healthy, natural, harmonious flow.
Which brings us to the most important part of all, what you're actually going to do with this information. This is all about putting these ideas into action. This is the powerful work you're about to do this week to move from just understanding this stuff intellectually to really living it.
So this week is all about building real skills. You're going to learn to become a conscious listener to your own thoughts. You'll start to understand why each part exists and what it's trying to do for you. You'll practice stepping in as a calm mediator between them. And the biggest goal of all is to strengthen that adult self so that it can be the one making the choices that lead you back to your true, authentic wholeness.
As you get started on the exercises for this week, I want you to hold this idea close. Please, really let this sink in. You are not broken. You never were. You are just fragmented. Your parts have been at war with each other. The work we're doing isn't about fixing a broken machine. It's about lovingly, patiently welcoming all of your pieces back home so they can be a team again.
So, I'll leave you with this question to carry with you. What would change for you right now if you stopped seeing yourself as a victim of all these inner voices
and started seeing yourself as the wise, compassionate leader of your own internal community. What if healing isn't about winning a war, but just about learning to lead the conversation? That's the powerful journey we're on together.
This podcast explained my mind better than I ever could, especially the part about not being one person. Because honestly, that's exactly what addiction felt like different versions of me fighting for control all day long. One part wanted recovery, one part wanted escape, one part hated me completely, and another part was just terrified underneath all of it. I used to think that meant I was crazy. Now I understand it differently. Fragmented. That word changed something for me. The podcast talked about addiction thriving in the conflict between your inner parts. That hit immediately because every relapse started with internal war. The critical voice attacking me, the scared part of me panicking, then the rationalizing voice stepping in saying, just use once and shut everybody up. That cycle felt automatic for years. And honestly, I never realized those were actually different ego states operating inside me. The parent, adult, child explanation made way too much sense, especially the critical parent. Mine sounds exactly like my father. Don't be weak. Man up. You're pathetic. You always ruin everything. That voice never shuts up completely. And eventually my inner child would collapse underneath it emotionally. That's when the cravings got loudest. Not because I wanted pleasure, because I wanted relief from the shame spiral happening inside my own head. The podcast explaining addiction as a compromised adult really hit me too. Because I used to think relapse meant I secretly wanted destruction. But listening to this, I realized my adult state wasn't leading anymore during those moments. It got overwhelmed, hijacked emotionally. That understanding gave me compassion for myself without removing accountability. That balance matters. The shadow section got uncomfortable immediately, though, especially hearing that anger itself isn't evil. That messed with me because anger has always terrified me. I saw what uncontrolled anger did growing up. So I buried mine. Suppressed it, pretended I was fine. But suppressed anger doesn't disappear. It leaks out sideways. Through addiction, through resentment, through self-destruction. The podcast saying addiction gives the shadow a chaotic voice felt painfully accurate. Because substances turned buried emotions into explosions. And afterward, I'd hate myself even more. That cycle nearly destroyed me. The biggest thing this episode changed for me, though, was the idea of leadership, not domination, not suppression, leadership. The podcast asked what would happen if we stopped seeing ourselves as victims of our inner voices and started becoming leaders of our internal community. That question honestly stayed in my head for days. Because my entire life has felt like internal combat. Fight cravings, fight emotions, fight thoughts, fight yourself. But what if recovery isn't actually war? What if it's mediation? That idea softened something inside me. Now, when my mind spirals, I try doing what they talked about. I stop and ask, which part of me is talking right now? Usually there's a scared child underneath the anger, or shame underneath the craving. And honestly, recognizing that changes the whole feeling. It stops being, I'm broken, and starts becoming, part of me is hurting right now. That difference matters more than people realize, because shame makes addiction stronger. Awareness weakens it. For the first time in my life, I'm starting to believe healing might not mean destroying parts of myself. Maybe it means finally learning how to listen to them without letting them run my life. And honestly, That feels a whole lot more possible than trying to hate myself into recovery ever did.
If something in this conversation stood out to you, don't ignore that. That's usually where the work begins. Recovery isn't about trying harder. It's about understanding what's actually happening and learning how to respond differently over time. If you're ready to take the next step, you can find resources, guidance, and support at soulrecoveryhub.com. Take what you heard today, sit with it, and keep moving forward. Copyright 2026, Mental Mike, all rights reserved.